Stop right there. If you're already interrupting my seminar, the least you can do is give us a laugh. Professor Adrian Thornton ripped the mop from Marcus Turner's hands and pointed at the equation his own department had failed to solve for 2 straight weeks. In front of 200 students, he forced the 41-year-old black single father to pick up the chalk and prove he had a brain. Laughter rippled through the hall. Phones rose in unison to film him. Marcus glanced at the drawing folded in his shirt pocket, then began to write. 3 minutes later, nobody was laughing anymore. Who was Marcus Turner really? Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button because this story does not end with the chalk going back down. A man Marcus had never even met was about to become the reason everything fell apart, and the reason everything finally got set right. The laughter had barely died when Marcus picked the mop back up and returned to the hallway outside the lecture hall, as if nothing unusual had happened. To the students filing out past him, he was already fading back into the wallpaper. Another anonymous man in a gray uniform pushing a bucket down a corridor. None of them knew that 3 hours earlier, before Professor Adrian Thornton humiliated him in front of 200 people, Marcus had already spent the entire day being exactly what he had trained himself to be for the past 20 years, invisible. He worked the night shift at Harrow Hall, home to the Department of Applied Mathematics at Whitmore University in Chicago. He cleaned floors that professors and graduate students walked across without ever looking down. It was steady work. It paid the rent and kept food in the refrigerator, and Marcus had never been ashamed of it. What quietly ate at him was something else. Somewhere along the way, he had started believing that mopping floors was the ceiling of what the world would ever allow him to become. That belief had settled into his bones the way exhaustion does. You stop noticing it because it never leaves. At home, none of that mattered because home meant Ethan. His 8-year-old son was endlessly curious and possessed the kind of quiet loyalty that made Marcus feel, even on his hardest nights, that he was doing something right. Ethan's mother, Claire, had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. Since then, it had been just the two of them, building a life from packed lunches, homework at the kitchen table, and a small apartment that always smelled faintly of dish soap and pencil shavings. Marcus had learned to be both parents at once. Most days he managed it without letting Ethan see how much it cost him. What almost nobody at Whitmore knew was that Marcus had once been the kind of student teachers pulled aside and told he had a gift. Growing up in Mississippi, he was the boy who finished tests early and checked his answers twice because he was bored. His teachers wrote letters to colleges for him without being asked. At 17, a full scholarship was waiting. It was a door standing wide open toward a future built entirely around numbers. Then his mother was diagnosed with cancer just weeks before he was supposed to leave. Staying did not feel like a choice. It felt like the only thing a son could do. Marcus deferred the scholarship, took whatever jobs he could find, and helped pay the hospital bills. He told himself it was temporary. By the time his mother passed away, the scholarship had expired. Then came full-time work, then Claire, then Ethan, then the loss of Claire. Every time Marcus reached for that old promise, another responsibility stood in front of it. 20 years passed since anyone had called him gifted. Eventually, the word felt like it belonged to somebody else's life. The strange part was that Marcus had never actually stopped doing mathematics. Late at night, after Ethan went to sleep, Marcus would pull an old spiral notebook from beneath a shelf in the utility closet. Its cover had become soft and worn at the corners. Inside were differential equations he worked through simply for the satisfaction of solving them. Number theory problems copied from discarded journals. Topology proofs that existed for no audience but himself. He solved problems on buses, in supply closets during breaks, and at the kitchen table after the dishes were done. Not for recognition. Because mathematics was the one part of himself that circumstances had never managed to take away. Ethan had grown up beside that notebook without fully understanding what it meant. Most evenings, the two of them shared the same small table. Ethan worked through multiplication tables while his father filled pages with equations far beyond anything being taught in nearby classrooms. When Ethan became frustrated and crumpled a worksheet, Marcus would smooth it out and tell him the same thing every time. Getting something wrong did not mean you weren't smart. It only meant you had not found the right way yet. Ethan believed his father completely. That was exactly why one question kept returning. If his dad could solve problems that hard, why did he spend his nights cleaning up after people who could not? Marcus always changed the subject. He never wanted Ethan to feel ashamed of the life they had built together. At Whitmore, Marcus's daily existence orbited around a very different kind of man. Adrian Thornton had chaired the Department of Applied Mathematics for 11 years. He controlled scholarships, research budgets, faculty appointments, and the future prospects of nearly everyone who passed through his department. He wore authority like an expensive watch. He wanted people to notice it. And he had decided long ago that people without academic titles simply did not belong in the same conversation as those who had earned them. He called Marcus Mop Man so often that some graduate students began using the nickname themselves. Among those students, nobody stood closer to Thornton than Daniel Ashford, a 26-year-old research assistant widely considered the sharpest mind the department had produced in years. Daniel was present at the seminar where Thornton first humiliated Marcus. The equation on the board had defeated the department's best graduate researchers for 2 weeks. When Marcus picked up the chalk and solved it with an ease none of them could match, Daniel's expression changed. It was not admiration. It was irritation. He had spent years being told that formal training separated people like him from everyone else. Watching a janitor succeed where he and his colleagues had failed challenged something deeper than his pride. He said nothing. But he remembered. Not everyone at Whitmore viewed Marcus the way Thornton did. Dr. Evelyn Voss, 62, had served as department chair before Thornton. She now held an honorary advisory position that kept her connected to Whitmore. Months earlier, Marcus had been forced to bring Ethan to work after his babysitter canceled. Ethan fell asleep in a lecture hall chair while Marcus, believing the building empty, stood at the board and worked through a proof from one of Voss's old doctoral papers. Voss had returned for a pair of glasses. She stopped in the doorway. She watched the man in a cleaning uniform solve a problem using the instincts of a trained researcher. She said nothing. But after that night, she began returning to the building more often. She was watching. And she was waiting. All of that history remained hidden beneath the surface until the afternoon Thornton decided to make Marcus an example. The department had organized an open seminar attended by nearly 200 students, faculty members, visiting researchers, and donors. On the board sat a nonlinear differential equation that Thornton's best graduate researchers had failed to solve. Thornton was still speaking when Marcus's cleaning cart rattled past the side entrance. Marcus stepped inside briefly to continue his route. Thornton stopped. He could have ignored the interruption. Instead, embarrassment pushed him toward cruelty. He announced loudly that if Marcus had already interrupted the seminar, the least he could do was give everyone a laugh. He crossed the room, pulled the mop from Marcus's hands, and pointed toward the equation. Then he mocked Marcus's job, his education, and his intelligence. Laughter spread through the hall. Phones rose almost simultaneously. Marcus stood there with a choice. He could put down the chalk, walk away, and keep the only job supporting his son. Silence was safer. He had chosen it 100 times before. But folded inside his shirt pocket was a drawing Ethan had made at school. In it, Ethan had drawn his father standing in front of a chalkboard instead of a mop. Beneath the drawing were 4 simple words. "My dad solves things." Marcus took the chalk. For several seconds, he studied the equation. Then he began writing. The first lines appeared with remarkable clarity. He used a lateral substitution to transform the complicated equation into something manageable. The laughter disappeared. Graduate students leaned forward. Thornton stopped smiling. 3 minutes later, Marcus placed the chalk down. Dr. Robert Hale, a visiting professor from the University of Michigan, walked toward the board. He examined every line. Then he turned to the room. The solution was correct. Thornton immediately accused Marcus of having seen the answer somewhere. He erased the board and wrote a harder problem. Sure, this would expose Marcus as a fraud, Thornton stepped back. Marcus solved that one too. This time, he worked backward from the boundary conditions toward the original structure. Dr. Hale called the approach original and elegant. Marcus simply picked up his mop and returned to work. But the cameras had already captured everything. By the next morning, a video titled "Black Janitor Solves Impossible Equation" was spreading across campus and social media. Within 48 hours, it had reached hundreds of thousands of views. People were amazed by Marcus's ability. Others were furious about how Thornton had treated him. For Thornton, the attention became another humiliation. His authority had been built on the belief that intellectual power flowed downward from him. Now the university was talking about a janitor as if he were the most capable person in the room. Thornton decided the video had to be corrected. He wanted the world to see Marcus fail. His opportunity came through the Midwest Mathematics Competition, an annual tournament where universities could enter trained contestants and independent candidates sponsored by faculty members. Thornton offered to sponsor Marcus himself. He presented the offer as generosity. He told the department nobody could accuse him of denying Marcus a fair chance. But the real plan was simple. Put Marcus into a competition designed for formally trained mathematicians. Watch him lose. Erase the humiliation. Restore the hierarchy. The terms were signed. If Marcus lost, he would be fired from Whitmore, and Thornton would refuse to recommend him for another university position. If Marcus won, Thornton would have to apologize publicly and acknowledge Marcus as a legitimate mathematician. To Thornton, the second outcome seemed impossible. Marcus wanted to refuse. His job supported Ethan. The competition could cost him everything. That night, Ethan watched the viral video on his father's phone. He asked why the people had laughed. Marcus told him the truth. They thought he couldn't solve it. Ethan watched until Dr. Hale confirmed the second solution. Then he looked at his father. But you did it anyway. There was no speech. No dramatic lesson. Just the simple observation of an 8-year-old. Marcus sat in the dim kitchen and realized something. Every time he chose silence because it was safer, he was teaching Ethan that other people had the right to decide what he was worth. He could not pass that lesson to his son. The next morning, Marcus accepted the challenge. Thornton was pleased. Daniel Ashford was chosen as the department's strongest contender. He had watched Marcus solve 2 equations, but still believed formal education would outweigh the instincts of a self-taught man. 3 weeks remained. And Thornton had no intention of making those weeks fair. Daniel had access to the research library, academic databases, expert guidance, and 6 hours a day dedicated to preparation. Marcus had an 8-hour shift. He had a son to pick up from school. Dinner. Laundry. Homework. And whatever hours remained after Ethan went to sleep. The first move looked harmless. Thornton arranged for Marcus's shift to change from nights to afternoons. The schedule change was technically routine, but it collided with library hours and Ethan's school pickup. Marcus had to pay a neighbor from his savings to watch Ethan. Then his access to the department's digital research archive disappeared. The explanation was simple. Custodial staff had no academic need for research materials. Marcus read the email twice in the utility closet. He understood exactly what was happening. Nobody had done anything openly illegal. Nothing was dramatic enough to challenge. The pressure simply closed one door after another. So Marcus adapted. He always had. He studied at the kitchen table late into the night. Some evenings he fell asleep with his pen still in his hand. More than once he woke to find a blanket around his shoulders and a sharpened pencil beside his notebook. Ethan never explained those small gestures. He simply took care of his father. Their shared table became a ritual. Ethan worked through multiplication while Marcus studied advanced mathematics. Sometimes Ethan fell asleep with his head on his arms. Marcus carried him to bed and returned to his unfinished equation. Then, one morning, Marcus opened his supply cart and discovered a book hidden beneath the cleaning rags. It was an advanced mathematics text. Inside the cover was Evelyn Voss's collector's stamp. The book explained a method for decomposing nonlinear systems into smaller solvable layers. Marcus had never seen the technique before. That night he studied it with the concentration of a man who had finally been handed a key to a door he had been testing for 20 years. Voss never approached him. She did not need to. She trusted him to understand. Between 2 pages, Marcus found a loose piece of paper. It contained an unfinished proof in handwriting he did not recognize. He folded it and placed it in his shirt pocket. He did not know why. He simply felt that he should keep it. As the competition approached, Marcus studied Thornton's most famous paper, a 2006 study that had won the Harlan Prize and helped secure Thornton's position as chair. It was considered a model of mathematical rigor. Marcus read it patiently. Then he reached step 11. He stopped. Something was wrong. Thornton had applied a convergence condition to a series that did not satisfy the requirements. The final conclusion might still be true. But the proof as published could not work. Marcus checked his reasoning 3 times. Then he built a counterexample. The flaw was real. He sat at the kitchen table long after Ethan went to sleep, rereading the paper. He hoped he had misunderstood. He had not. There were only 2 possibilities. Thornton had made a fundamental error that nobody had caught in more than 15 years. Or something much worse had happened. Marcus had no evidence for the second possibility. So he wrote down only what he could prove. He copied the counterexample onto 3 pages. Then he hid those pages beneath the insole of his shoe. He told nobody. Not Ethan. Not Voss. Nobody. What began as a fight for dignity had become a question about the foundation of Thornton's entire career. For several days, nothing happened. Marcus studied. He worked. He shared dinner with Ethan. One evening, Ethan asked if solving difficult problems ever stopped being scary. Marcus smiled. No, you just get better at working while you're scared. Ethan accepted the answer. They spent the rest of the evening solving a simple word search together. It felt ordinary. Later, Marcus would remember that evening as the last quiet night before everything accelerated. The next blow came through his locker. Another custodial worker noticed the old notebook Marcus kept hidden there. The information eventually reached Thornton. Within a day, Marcus's locker was opened without his knowledge. His notebook was confiscated. The university cited an administrative policy concerning personal items. Marcus returned to the locker that evening. The notebook was gone. That notebook contained 20 years of his intellectual life. High school equations. Notes written beside his mother's hospital bed. Problems from the early years with Claire. Ideas he had written while raising Ethan. And near the back were calculations related to Thornton's flawed proof. Marcus sat on the floor of the utility closet. For several minutes, he could not move. The notebook was not merely an object. It was proof that his old self had existed. Proof that the gifted boy from Mississippi had never completely disappeared. And now someone had taken the evidence. The only thing still safe was the counterexample hidden under his shoe. At school, Ethan faced his own version of the problem. His class had been asked to draw what their parents did for a living. Ethan drew his father in front of a chalkboard covered in numbers. A classmate looked at it and said, "Your dad just mops floors." Ethan answered immediately, "He does both." That evening, Marcus found the drawing inside Ethan's backpack. Beneath the chalkboard were the same 4 words. "My dad solves things." Marcus sat on the edge of his son's bed holding the paper. He realized Thornton's contempt had started reaching Ethan. He could no longer protect his son by pretending nothing was happening. 2 days before the competition, Thornton delivered what he believed was the final blow. He withdrew his sponsorship. He told the tournament organizers that he could no longer take academic responsibility for a competitor without formal training. Marcus's eligibility was suspended. 3 weeks of sacrifice seemed to disappear in an instant. For the first time, Marcus thought about quitting. Maybe the safest thing was to stop. Maybe reaching for a different life was only hurting Ethan. That evening, he told his son the competition was over. Ethan said nothing. He walked to his backpack and pulled out a worksheet that had been erased and rewritten so many times the paper was nearly thin. "Yesterday I got this wrong 4 times, he said. Marcus asked what happened next. "You told me to try a 5th time." Then Ethan looked at him. "Does that rule only apply to me?" Marcus had no answer. His son had just handed his own lesson back to him. The next morning, Evelyn Voss found Marcus in the utility closet. She handed him a sponsorship letter. It was already signed. She had personally delivered it to the tournament committee. As a former department chair and honorary advisor, her endorsement satisfied the requirements. Thornton had opened the door as a trap. Voss told Marcus he did not get to slam it shut simply because he realized Marcus might actually win. Marcus stared at the letter. Then he asked why she was helping him. Voss looked at him for a long moment. "I watched you solve problems in the dark that half my department couldn't solve in daylight," she said. "I'm no longer willing to pretend I didn't see it." Marcus reached beneath his shoe and retrieved the 3 folded pages. He placed them in his jacket pocket. He was no longer fighting only for himself and Ethan. He was beginning to fight for the truth. The competition took place in Whitmore's largest lecture hall. 500 seats filled before the opening remarks. Students, faculty, donors, journalists, and people who had seen the viral video packed the room. Marcus entered wearing plain clothes. He carried a pencil. The 3 pages remained hidden in his shoe. Ethan sat in the front row holding his drawing. Across the room, Thornton sat beside Daniel Ashford. Marcus took his seat among the contestants. 3 weeks of sabotage, a stolen notebook, and a withdrawn sponsorship had brought him there. But once the first packet landed on the table, none of it mattered. The signal came. The first round gave 16 contestants 30 minutes to solve 3 problems. Marcus began almost immediately. Around him, competitors erased entire lines and chewed nervously on pencil ends. Marcus kept a steady rhythm. He finished with 11 minutes remaining. When the scores appeared, Marcus had a perfect result. Daniel was second. Thornton's face remained controlled. His shoulders did not. The second round narrowed the field to 8. The problems were harder. Marcus relied on techniques he had developed alone over 20 years. He finished 8 minutes early. Again, he was first. Daniel followed. The room had changed. Nobody was laughing now. In the semifinal, Marcus faced Warren Blake, a graduate researcher with 3 published papers and years of tournament experience. Warren approached the problem methodically. Marcus saw a hidden shortcut. He finished in 7 minutes. When the result was announced, Warren walked over and shook his hand. "Beautiful solution," he said. It was a simple sentence. But Marcus felt its weight. For the first time, someone inside the academic world was treating him as an equal. Not an exception. Not a curiosity. An equal. In the other semifinal, Daniel narrowly won. As he left the stage, he saw Marcus speaking with Warren. For the first time, Daniel wondered what it would mean to lose to a man who had never attended one of his classes. And for the first time, he wondered whether the problem was Marcus's lack of training or his own belief in what training was supposed to mean. Then came the final. Marcus and Daniel faced each other. The final problem was a nonlinear system of differential equations with boundary conditions designed to punish anyone who rushed. Both men had 15 minutes. Daniel began immediately. Marcus read the problem twice. He studied its entire structure. 10 minutes passed. Daniel reached the 4th step and stopped. He erased most of his work. His confidence cracked. Marcus noticed a hidden symmetry. He remembered the technique from Voss's book. He began separating the system into layers. One piece resolved. Then another. Then another. 3 minutes remained. Marcus wrote the final line. He put down his pencil. The judges examined the solution. 1 minute passed. Then another. Finally, the head judge stood. The solution is correct and complete. The auditorium erupted. Ethan jumped to his feet. Daniel put down his pencil and walked across the stage. He shook Marcus's hand. There was no resentment. Only respect. I never thought someone without my training could see a problem more clearly than I could, Daniel said quietly. I'll remember that. Marcus nodded. The head judge then turned toward Thornton. He reminded him of the agreement. Marcus had won. Thornton owed him a public apology and formal acknowledgement. The room went silent. Thornton stood slowly. He adjusted his jacket. Then he spoke. A single competition does not turn a janitor into a mathematician. The room froze. I see no reason to dignify a stunt with a formal apology. His voice remained calm. That made the insult worse. Marcus did not shout. He did not insult Thornton. He simply walked toward the stage. Then let mathematics decide who is telling the truth. He took out the 3 pages. He explained the flaw in Thornton's 2006 paper. Section 4. Step 11. The convergence condition had been applied to a series that did not satisfy it. Marcus presented his counterexample. He was careful. He did not accuse Thornton of theft. He said only that the published proof could not have been constructed the way Thornton claimed. A murmur spread through the auditorium. Several professors leaned toward one another. The judges examined the pages. Then Evelyn Voss stood. She walked onto the stage. The room became completely silent. Voss revealed that she had privately suspected irregularities in Thornton's published work for 7 years. She had never possessed a strong enough counterexample, and university leadership had told her to keep her concerns private. Then she explained something else. The disputed proof closely resembled unpublished notes belonging to Dr. Samuel Whitfield, a mathematician who had once worked at Whitmore before his death. Whitfield's papers were stored in a restricted university archive. The archive contained access records. Those records showed Thornton had checked out Whitfield's boxed notes for an extended period shortly before his 2006 paper was submitted, and he had never returned to the archive after that period. Marcus remembered the loose paper from Voss's book. The unfinished proof. The handwriting that had never matched hers. He reached into his pocket. He had kept it. He held the paper beside his counterexample. Voss looked at it. Her expression changed. She recognized the handwriting. "Samuel Whitfield," she said. The room erupted in whispers. The scrap, combined with the archive records and Marcus's mathematical counterexample, transformed the matter from a disputed equation into something far more serious. Thornton was asked to respond. For the first time, his composure disappeared. He could not explain the flawed proof. He could not explain its resemblance to Whitfield's notes. He could not explain his archive access. 500 people waited for an answer. Thornton said nothing. He turned and walked out. The investigation lasted several months. It confirmed substantial overlap between Thornton's published proof and Whitfield's unpublished work. It also confirmed a documented pattern of archive access Thornton could not adequately explain. Thornton was stripped of the Harlan Prize. He was removed as department chair. He was barred from teaching at Whitmore. Further investigations began into other published papers. Samuel Whitfield's name was restored to the academic record. The university issued an apology to his surviving family. For Marcus, however, the victory was not about revenge. Whitmore offered him something very different: a full scholarship to complete an undergraduate degree in mathematics, an accelerated track based on a competency examination, a paid research assistant position under Evelyn Voss, a living stipend, childcare support, and full access to the library and research databases he had once been forbidden to use. The university president told Marcus they could not return the years he had lost, but they could make sure no future door closed simply because of the title printed on his employee badge. Marcus asked whether the university was simply handing him a position. Voss shook her head. "No, we're giving you the chance to earn it." That distinction mattered. Marcus had spent 20 years being told, directly and indirectly, that a man in his position should not want more. Now he was finally being offered something different: a fair chance. He signed the paperwork at the same kitchen table where so much of his life had been decided. Ethan sat beside him. Marcus then made one request. He asked Whitmore to create a program for capable workers who had never been given access to higher education. The university agreed. The program was named after Samuel Whitfield. What had started as one man's fight for dignity became an opportunity for others who had remained invisible. Within its first year, the program accepted several employees from Whitmore's custodial and maintenance staff. People whose names had never appeared near a research paper. People whose abilities had simply never been given a place to surface. 2 years later, Marcus had completed most of his accelerated mathematics degree. He worked as a research assistant under Voss. He co-authored a new paper, and Ethan was now 10. One afternoon, they walked through the front doors of Harrow Hall. Not the side entrance Marcus had used for years. The front doors. Neither of them said anything about it. They did not need to. Marcus had a research office of his own. It contained a desk, a lamp, a large whiteboard, and a smaller table for Ethan. Ethan still preferred sitting beside his father while he worked. One afternoon, Ethan sat at the small table working through a problem. He erased it once. Then again. Then a third time. Then a fourth. Finally, he looked at his father. "Should I try again?" Marcus smiled. This would be the 5th attempt. Ethan picked up a piece of chalk. He walked to the whiteboard. Marcus stood beside him. He did not give his son the answer. He waited. Exactly as he had always promised himself he would. Ethan began working. Marcus watched quietly. He had not won the competition to prove that cleaning floors was somehow beneath mathematics. He had not won it to prove that a janitor was better than a professor. He had won because he wanted his son to understand something much more important. The work a person does can describe how they spend their days. It can describe their job. It can describe their responsibilities. But it can never decide what they are capable of becoming. Marcus Turner spent 20 years being overlooked. People saw the mop. They saw the uniform. They saw the job title. They never bothered to look beyond them. Until one day, a piece of chalk was placed in his hand. And the world finally had to look. His story is a reminder that the people we underestimate may be carrying abilities we know nothing about. Sometimes the quietest person in the room has spent years preparing for a moment nobody else even knew was coming. And sometimes the person everyone believes has nothing to prove is the one who ends up proving everything. If this story stayed with you, take a second to hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because there is always another story here about the quiet ones who prove everyone wrong. Thank you for staying until the very end, and we will see you in the next story.